This is the Lean Builders Hoots on the Ground podcast with absolutely, positively no bullshito. Join us as we dig into exactly what lean construction is and how we can use these concepts and strategies in the field. This podcast will be different as we journey to job sites and mine the minds of lean builders, all in effort to pass forward building knowledge from those who have put their time in to learn a better way. Because that's just what lean builders do. What's up, y'all? Adam Hoots here, the Lean Builder Hoots on the Ground podcast, coming to you with no bullshito, special solo episode on accountability today. We're going to have a pretty deep conversation on what exactly that means, how to obtain that on your project sites, and really just how to be a better leader in general. We're going to talk a little bit about the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. And I'm going to give you my kind of outlook, my 2 cents on accountability, what that means, where it's from. But before we get going, I've got to drop this disclaimer. If you hop into this podcast and you haven't watched episode 8 or episode 12, where I talk about trust and building trust, creating trust, maintaining trust, measuring trust on job sites, that is the key to what we're about to talk about today. You know, Patrick Lencioni taught us with the 5 dysfunctions of the team, the bottom of that pyramid, everything is built on trust. If you don't have a level of trust, you will not be able to have healthy conflict to make commitments that then you can hold each other accountable. We're going to talk about accountability. This is from the perspective that we have already gained trust from one person. I think there's several ways that accountability takes place on project sites. The most commonly used one is if something doesn't get done, if there's an issue in the field or something that could have been prevented that didn't get prevented, the boss is going to hold you accountable. And you know what that means. That boss is going to come to you, they're going to rip you a new one, and you're not going to want to be coming to work the next day because you're going to be embarrassed. Versus the other boss on the flip side, and this is the second view of accountability, is like, I understand that this is due on X day. Well, what are the things that I as a leader am going to do or set as standards that are really going to drive performance all the way up until that day? I'm holding people accountable before that day or that event is due versus holding them accountable after that due date. And I think that's the key in difference of leadership styles when it comes down to driving accountability, or what that means. It's having the ability to consistently manage performance up to the date that the task or event is supposed to be due. This is not I'm going to hold you accountable after the fact. This is, I'm taking it internal as a leader, and I'm taking ownership of what I'm doing in order to drive and help you understand why it's important at any point in the journey. I think similar to what a wise man once said on the Learnings and Missteps podcast, control is an illusion. Accountability is a myth, right? Accountability is a tool that you use when your leadership has gone awry. When you haven't been able to give purpose, or you haven't been able to find what motivates your people, you as a leader have not been accountable to your people. If there's not a mindset, of accountability and willingness to get things done, that is something that a leader cannot instill. Accountability is a tool that's used when leadership is poor. Most people that need or have a sense of accountability have really lost their connection, their meaning, their purpose, or their why. Now let's think about this. If I had 2 groups of people, and the first group of people had somebody who was always holding them accountable, always up on them, always making sure they're doing the right thing, never allowing them to go beneath the standard, which again, you kind of think of that standard as the worst behavior that a leader is willing to accept. It's that thermostat. It's where is that performance always going to lead back to whenever I'm detracting or whenever I'm performing high. I'm always going to have this kind of mid-set of what my expectation as a leader is. And so I go back to those 2 groups, right? This one group has this leadership of accountability, and I'm driving and I expect the performance and the best, versus this other group who really doesn't have that, but they've got a group of people who are always just voluntarily willing to do the right thing, voluntarily holding themselves accountable, voluntarily having the discipline to go above and beyond and really just meet it. Which one of these 2 groups of people do you think is going to win in battle? It's going to be the people who don't have to be held accountable. It's those people who hold themselves accountable. It's that self-discipline because they understand what it takes to get it done and they want it. That's that extreme ownership that Jocko Willink talks about in his book. That book is just amazing for this concept. When you really think about accountability and this concept of extreme ownership where I am going to take internally, I'm going to own everything that happens around me and everything that happens around that. I am responsible for everything that is happening in this world. That's extreme ownership. And Jocko actually talks about the pull between extreme ownership on one side and being able to have decentralized command on the other. Because if you have too much extreme ownership in everything that you do, you as a leader can't possibly be in every circumstance at every time. What he recommends is this decentralized command. But as a leader, knowing where and what is the most important points and prioritizing and making sure that your people are prepared for and understand the why behind certain things and standards that you've set. That's imperative as a leader. And you're constantly checking those. You're constantly evolving those to make sure that you're adapting and fitting those to the people, that you're able to motivate the people who are engaged and responsible for the actual driving forward of change in what you're doing. What does all this mean? On job sites, you know, we're really thinking about how can I use this as a leader on a job site. And one thing I think it's important that we understand, what is a commitment? And when is a commitment being made? A commitment typically has three parts. It has one, the person that is making the request. I am asking you to do something. The second part, which we don't really perform very well, is the negotiation, that talking back, that saying, hey, do I fully understand what your expectation is of me right now? That's the part that's frequently missed. And the third part is the agreement, where I say, yes, that's my expectation, and this is when the expectation is due. And then we agree, and then and only then can I even think about having accountability within that relationship. Another thing you can do on job sites is say and hear the word no. And so when I talk about saying the word no, it's, hey, if somebody's asking you to make a commitment that you just can't make, you need to say no. No, and this is why I don't think I can do that. Or, yes, but I need X, Y, and Z. That's also a form of no. I learned that on the Learnings and Missteps podcast as well. And so I encourage you to say the word no. But in contrast, you also have to be listening for the word no. There's many different ways to say the word no. Like I just mentioned, yes, but. That's a no, unless I have these things that I'm going to clarify or quantify. I encourage you to both hear the word no and say the word no, and be okay with that, because that then starts that second part of commitments, the agreement side. And until we can have this negotiation and both have clear expectations and understanding of what the outcome should be, then we'll never be able to have alignment, we'll never be able to make commitments, and I'll never be able to hold anybody. Understand the two levels of accountability, both, again, as leaders, right? Am I going to wait for the event to happen and then it not to be ready? If Jocko Willink waited until the event happened and he was in battle and wasn't able to have all of his guns cleaned, do you think that would help him from an accountability standpoint? No. He trained his soldiers to clean their guns, to clean their guns, to clean their guns, to be able to understand. And did he check? No, he didn't have to check, because they understood that without a clean gun, I could die in the battlefield. And so I'm asking you to do the same thing. Understand the two different views of accountability. One that happens after the event, where we're looking back and we're saying, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? And the other one is looking before the event, saying, these are the things that need to be done in order for us to be successful. Understand those two levels of accountability, and how do you apply them to your job site? Are you waiting until the very last day where you're supposed to turn on temporary power and then running out on the job site and saying, why don't we have any lights? Or are you taking the ownership to drive 3 months ahead of time saying, okay, do I have all my conduit in the ground? Okay. 2 months ahead of time, have I pulled all my wires? Okay. A month ahead of time, have I terminated all my wires? Okay. And have I gone and ran and did all my testing and commissioning? And am I ready to flip that switch to be able to turn on the lights and have the power in a safe manner? These are things that lean builders do. These are things that we ask ourselves months in advance, and then we hold ourselves accountable to make sure that that work is getting done, that we're inspiring and motivating the actual workers who are getting the work done, and we're valuing those people, and we're listening to them, and we're encouraging them to drive innovation on the job sites to be able to get things done easier, better, faster for construction. We'll get Felipe in here and he will tell us how to scrum it and how to EBFC it. Another thing we can do on the job sites is really cue in and tone into the language that we're using. Are we thinking below the line? Are we using words like blaming others or being victims of the situation or circumstance? Or are we thinking above the line, right? This comes from a book called Principles of Oz. It's a fantastic book that's a spin on the Wizard of Oz. And when we look and think that things are internal, and this line, right? And this line represents where I'm thinking. Am I thinking above it, where things are happening for me? Or am I thinking below it, where things are happening to me? Again, they're referencing this victim versus victor mindset. How am I looking at the world? How am I taking this in? How am I receiving this as a leader? And then how am I distributing this? I wouldn't do it justice if I didn't talk about this accountability meter. This is something that I've come up with over my years in managing people and job sites. As I'm really going through and focusing on myself as a leader, you can see here in the green section, again, this is kind of like an RPM meter, like how intense am I having to get from an accountability perspective? I like Keon's 5 levels of delegation, so maybe this is somewhat of a 5 levels of accountability, if you will. And so at the first level, right, I'm making sure that folks are familiar with the process. I, as a leader, am making sure that I'm doing my due diligence to teach and include and make these people responsible as members of our. And if our folks still aren't getting it, then I'm making sure that they have formal training and that they've been taught the right ways to do the things, the best practices. And maybe they're taught by me, maybe they're taught by other leaders of the organization, maybe they're taught by their peers, but somehow they receive formal training or education. And so if the awareness isn't working and the formal training isn't, then we move into the more of a coaching role. And so in a coaching role, I'm going to be asking you questions. I'm going to be trying to engage you. I'm going to be trying to really reach your mind, open your mindset to be able to receive some different information, to understand, hey, we try to make you aware. We've tried to give you formal training, and now we're coaching you. Like, this is the way. It's been proven. Several people here are doing it this way. Why don't you engage with these people and understand how they're being successful, utilizing these same principles that we're talking about. And now if it's still not working, we're starting to yellow line it here. We're starting to get into okay, one more time, let's relook at the process. Let's understand, because again, look at this. We've been from awareness to education to coaching. So now we're looking like, hey, are our expectations clear? And so we might do that through trying this same exercise or holding somebody else accountable through these same exact steps. And maybe they get it, maybe they don't. If they don't, then maybe our expectations aren't clear. And so from this yellow point down, this has all been focused on process. This has all been focused internally on what am I doing? What can I do to change the outcome of this situation? Again, that's that accountability thinking before the event is done. That's where a lot of people struggle, especially within the construction industry. We always like to hop in and say, who did it? Why did it happen? What went wrong? Instead of saying internally, what was the process that went wrong? What things could I as a leader have done internally different in order to make a different outcome? Okay, so let's say you've gone through these 3 or 4 steps and accountability is still not happening and the person's still struggling. Now it's time to flip the script and say, all right, we might want to start looking at the people. It's time to have some radical candor feedback. This is my expectation. I've made it clear in these 4 different ways and you're still not cutting it. What are we going to do about that? And let's open up and let's create a psychologically safe environment for that person to tell you maybe there's something wrong health-wise. Maybe there's something wrong mentally at that moment in time. Maybe they're having family issues. You don't know what somebody else is going through. And so at this point, it's really, really important to hit the pause button and approach this thing from a radical candor mindset, which says, I care personally about you, but I'm going to challenge you directly. Your performance hasn't been meeting my expectation, but because I care about you, I'm going to come to you and have a crucial conversation. During this conversation, we're going to start to talk about your performance. And my expectation for the consistency of managing your performance to an expectation that meets what the team needs to be successful. If we have that conversation and I don't have much more information and you're still not performing at your role, I'm starting to think that maybe this just isn't the role that is right for you. And so what we do at that point is we make a role modification, and then we'll start back over and we're going to make you aware of your new role, and then we're going to give you some formal education, and then we're going to coach you. And then we're going to make sure our expectations are clear, followed by having crucial conversations. And if at this point, and we've gone through this accountability matrix twice and you still don't get it, then out of respect for both you and the company and the people within that organization, we're going to depart ways, because this just isn't working. Again, out of respect, it's out of love, we want you to be happy. And in this environment, if you're not meeting the expectations, you're not going to be happy, nor is the company going to be happy. So it's just right that ways are parted and things are moved forward. In Jocko Willink's book, Extreme Ownership, he points out that accountability is really just it's a mindset. There really are no bad teams out there. There are only bad leaders. And they talk about boats in the waves and how the same team, when they get caught in the waves, could get the boats through in no time with different leadership. They have plenty of things to blame, whether it's the wave size or strength or the cold waters or whatever else you might be able to enter in that excuse. They're not blaming that. They're looking internal at the leadership, making changes, and they're still successful. I said this earlier, but it's worth saying again. The culture that's established on a job is determined by the worst behavior that a leader is willing to accept. I, as a leader, set that standard. I set that thermostat to where my performance is dictated, and you must have at a minimum this performance. Over that, we'll accept, but at a minimum, we are accepting only this performance, and that performance has got to be grade A, clean, organized, inventory just enough to keep us going, and respecting all work with flow, with visualization, continuous improvement, and getting better each and every day. We're holding ourselves accountable because we've got discipline to make that happen. So I'll end with this, and again, I think it's super important to recognize that you have got to have listened to the episodes on trust before you dive into this one on accountability, because without trust, accountability will not work. That is the most crucial thing when you're thinking about it. If I'm holding somebody accountable, essentially means that I've built this level of trust with them, and we've had a little bit of healthy conflict in order to work out a commitment. And all I'm doing is making sure that commitment stays front and center, and that I'm managing the performance of that person to meet those commitments that have been made to the team. Because once you get a team and you start allowing those daily huddles and the entire team to make commitments to one another, all of a sudden it's not just the pressure of one person that's going to hold you accountable, but it's the entire team that's holding folks accountable. And that's what lean builders do. They create this culture of accountability where it's not a leader that's having to hold somebody accountable either even before, during, or after these events that things are done. It's happening internally within each person on the job site. Has internalized this concept of, I'm going to hold myself accountable. I'm going to have the discipline to show up, to get the things done that I need to do, because I know the reason why that I'm doing what I'm doing. The person behind me in the line in the parade of trades is coming through here, and they're going to be the next person that takes ownership of this space and that is able to make decisions, and because it's clean and it's organized, and we're taking care of people in the jobs. And so once we continue to understand and make those things priorities, then accountability will catch on like lighter fluid, and just one match at a time we'll be able to set an accountability fire throughout the construction. I'll leave you with this challenge, Lean Builder Nation. Do you think of accountability as what you're going to do after something is not done? Or do you think about accountability as the things that you're able to do leading up to an event or something that needs to be done? And are you explaining the why and the purpose behind things that need to get done? Or are you coming back after the fact, Monday morning quarterbacking, yelling, screaming, throwing your hard hat, trying to drive accountability after the fact? Are you promoting accountability as a crude tool? Or are you being a good leader that's really driving accountability within your team to allow them to have the discipline to hold one another accountable for results? Because that's what lean builders do.